Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Cyrus Webb Presents. I'm your host, Cyrus Webb. So glad you guys could tune in once again. For those joining us on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and on X, we're glad to have all of you with us. As always, we do have the chat open for you guys, so feel free to be able to chime in on any questions you have for this segment, as well as, of course, any comments you have as well. We're about to connect with our friends over on Amazon, so I can introduce you guys to today's guest and a very interesting topic, a book I had a chance to read. I think you guys are going to find very timely, but also a conversation that truly involves all of us. So I hope you guys enjoy it. And we're now live on the Amazon Live platform with Cyrus Webb Presents. If you guys are new to us on Amazon, welcome. Make sure you guys do hit that follow button, either here in this corner or down below. You also will see the book by our next guest. Excited to welcome author Richard J. Sexton to our broadcast today. He's the author of this book you guys see here. It's called Food Fight, and the subtitle is Misguided Policies, Supply Challenges, and the Impending Struggle to Feed a Hungry World. You guys can see it there in print on Amazon, as well as the Kindle edition. I'm going to highlight it for you guys there. When talk to Richard, not only about the writing of the book, what it's been like for him to be a part of this very important conversation, helping us not only to look at food a little bit differently, but also the impact that all of our decisions can have on feeding the world. Richard, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
Cyrus, it's my great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
The pleasure's definitely all mine. Richard, I want to begin with what I just said, because I think a lot of times, and this book really, I think, helped me as a reader to be able to think about this, that the world is really small when it comes to how we all are interconnected, when it comes to food and making sure that there is food for those who need it. What has that conversation been like for you, Richard, to be able to have with people who've read the book?
Yeah, I mean, writing the book, Cyrus, was really kind of, for me, assembling pieces to a puzzle, and the pieces I'd accumulated over the years based on my own work and the work of various colleagues. And one of the things I saw was that we were putting a lot of emphasis on, if you will, sort of the ills and harms of the food production system, its impacts on the environment, some of the inequities that are associated with it, but we really weren't emphasizing the very basic need to produce enough food to feed the planet and to avoid increasing hunger and malnutrition and rising food prices. And so, we're doing lots of things as a global society. Individual countries across the planet are doing lots of things to cause less food to be produced, and yeah, so that's what really prompted me to write the book, to say, hey, we've got to pay attention to this aspect, because in many ways it's the most fundamental obligation of a global society.
I mentioned earlier, Richard, that I don't think people always think about how small the world is and how interconnected we are with our choices. Is that one of the things that you're noticing readers are picking up on as well?
That's right, because anything that we do, for example, in the United States to cause less food to be produced, to take lands out of production, reverberates across the planet, because all of these markets are interconnected through trade, and so price price movements in this country are going to lead to price movements elsewhere. Mm-hmm. Things we do to take land out of production here is probably going to cause more land to come into production in other places. So yeah, we can't live in a bubble in the US or in the European Union. We're all connected when it comes to producing food.
One thing I was saying to you before we went live here, that I did not know a lot about your backstory, Richard, before reading Food Fight, but I did learn about your upbringing because you wrote about it, about the way that you looked at food and also food waste. Now, this is an interesting topic. I mean, I turned 50 this year. So I was one of those kids who grew up where, my parents were always telling me, don't put more on your plate than you can eat. You don't waste food. I'm not sure that is talked about as much today as it was when I was growing up, and I'm sure you heard that a lot. How did your own upbringing and view of food waste, how did it shape the person you are today, Richard?
Yeah, great question and great point. But yes, I grew up in a household where wasting food was probably considered a very serious sin, and you didn't leave the table until you'd eaten everything on your plate, because we knew full well, even in those times, that there were hungry people in the world, and it just wasn't right to waste food. And so, yeah, food waste seems like one of the aspects of low-hanging fruit, if you will, where we can come together as a global society and say, hey, we've got to waste less food. And in fact, the United States, the European Union, the United Nations, all of the major governmental bodies are saying we got to cut food waste in half. That's really a goal and laudable, I think, but I think it's going to be very difficult to do in practice. So I talk about that in the book in terms of, is it realistic that we're going to be able to cut food waste as much as a lot of the leaders say that we need to do? And I'm pessimistic in that regard. There's certainly things that we can do, such as do a better job with food dates, dates on foods, and the fact that most of us misinterpret those. So I think those things are in the pipeline, and I think that they're going to help. But I think it's reducing food waste is something we need to do, but it's only a small piece to the puzzle of making sure we have enough food moving forward in this century to avoid rising hunger and malnutrition.
Richard, to that point, I thought about something else you mentioned in the book, and I think this is where personal responsibility comes in. I mean, you just mentioned, of course, policy, which people automatically think about lawmakers, right? But you really show that this is something that is a personal responsibility, again, for all of us. The way that we view it, also the way we approach it. Talk to us about that, because I think it's very easy for us to think, okay, that's something for them to handle. How important was it for you in writing this book to show that it really is incumbent on all of us on how we address the issue of not only food security, but also making sure that there is food for all?
Yeah, that's right. And so that's why, we have to be concerned as citizens of, here, I'm here in the US, but, wherever we are, that, we're paying attention to this really most basic obligation of society, to feed its people. And, we're not succeeding at that right now. The most recent UN reports came out just a few days ago, and the UN says there's still about 700 million people in the world that are facing hunger, and then over 2.3 billion that are food insecure, and that's roughly a third of the population. So, we all have to do what we can, and I think that wasting less food in our households is part of the equation. But Cyrus, there's food loss and food waste all the way up the supply chains, and from production and harvesting, processing, retailing, and so forth. So there's a lot of that throughout the supply chain. And again, some of the statistics say it's upward of a third that's lost or wasted. And so if we could reduce that, by a half, as the goal is, it would be great. I don't think we're going to be able to do that, but where we can, do better in that regard, we should. And that, for most of us, that starts in our households, in terms of, not throwing out food just because it has a label date on it, because the label date's probably a sell-by date, it's not a use-by date, and so, those things are still good, and doing a better job in terms of shopping, not buying too much, and so forth. So that's what we can do at the household level. But the food loss and the food waste is at every stage of the supply chain. So it's a big problem, across the supply chain, not just within households.
Right. Such a great point. Hey, Mom. My mom is watching on Facebook. Good to see you, Mom. And we have a question actually from Facebook. Chris Irvin. Chris, thank you so much for watching. And this actually is something that you address in the book, Richard, but I want to ask the question. Chris says, do you think genetically modifying food has contributed to food waste?
No, I don't. I think genetically modified food has increased the food supplies, because there's plenty of studies out there that show that there's a yield advantage on average of about 20% if you use the genetically modified version rather than the conventional version. And frankly, one of the failures of society in the 21st century has been to impose bans and severe limits on genetic modification, and then the sort of the parallel innovation of gene editing. So with genetic modification, you're bringing in a foreign or an external gene. But with genetic engineering, you're just rearranging the genes. You're not introducing a foreign gene, and but they're both tarred together. But there's no scientific evidence that genetic modification or gene editing is in any way harmful. And to the extent it's been banned or severely limited in Europe, parts of Africa, even Russia, it's been to the detriment of food production and food supply, and probably to the detriment of the environment, because a lot of the genetic modifications are to give plants natural resistance to pests like worms and so forth. So no, we've done as a global society, we've done a bad thing in terms of forestalling genetic modifications and genetic engineering. That would help the food supply problem, no doubt about it.
Richard, that brings up an interesting point, because you just mentioned something about pests, and you addressed that in the book. I thought about it as you were talking, and one of the things you talk about are pesticides, and I think that's been part of a conversation we've been now hearing more of. As I mentioned, from my audience is joining me on the radio side. I'm here in Mississippi, so it's one of the things, of course, that we've been hearing more about. Talk to us about that, because again, it goes to a lot of things, a lot of components we don't think about. What has that been like for you to make sure people are aware of things like that, like pesticides, but also the impacts of the environment and how that's contributing to food loss?
Yeah, when you look at genetic modification, some people say, well, it's increased pesticide use because of one of the big modifications for corn and soybeans in particular was to make it tolerant to the application of glyphosate, which most of us know more commonly as Roundup. And so, in the absence of genetic modification, people were still applying pesticides to attack weeds and so forth. But, the big thing in terms of particularly corn is, it's been genetically modified to produce, in essence, the bacterium Bt that a lot of us spray on our tomatoes and things like that. And so, in the absence of that genetic modification, farmers would be having to dump all kinds of pesticides on their crops to kill these, rootworms and other things that attack the crops. So on balance, the genetic modification has been a plus for the environment. And then, Cyrus, the other big thing that's true, and we talk about this a lot in the book, is that, whenever we do things such as ban GMOs, take productive land out of production in the US and Europe, we encourage land going in other parts of the world. So we encourage the deforestation of sensitive areas such as the Brazilian Amazon, areas of Southeast Asia and Africa and so forth. And that's about the worst thing we can do for the environment. When you deforest natural lands, there's significant greenhouse gas emissions, loss of biodiversity, and so on. And so, that's the part of the equation that lots of people miss. So we can say, well, we don't want this genetic modification, misguided, but then the consequence is we give up these yield advancements, and then in order to produce more food, we expand the land base, what they call extensification, and that's about the worst thing you can do for the environment.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier about the areas that you are pessimistic about, Richard, but we do find that you are optimistic in ways too. Talk to us about what is it that fuels your optimism.
Yeah, great question. And if we go back in history a little bit, there are people that have been famously wrong in terms of sending out warnings that the planet wasn't going to be able to feed itself. I mean, the most famous of those people was, Thomas Malthus centuries ago. But there have been people that have come after them, and they said, "Hey, we're going to have a famine. Lots of people are going to die." And they've been wrong. And so I'm not making that kind of a pessimistic call. I'm saying we will have it within our capabilities to feed a growing world population, a wealthier world population, a population that wants to have a more diversified diet. We're well capable of doing it, but we have put the brakes on expanding agricultural production and oftentimes in misguided notions in the name of the environment, and those types of things. And so I'm saying, yes, we can do this. We can reduce hunger. We can reduce food prices, but we have to remove the shackles that we've imposed upon the agricultural system. And my prescription is very simple. It's not complicated at all. It is produce food in the places where it's most productive and using the most productive means, and that'll be the best for food production, and it will be the best for the environment. And that's a point a lot of people miss. But we need to get more food off a given land base. We need to avoid that extensification then, which is the real harm to the environment, the real source of greenhouse gas emissions. And so it's a simple prescription. We just have to do it, and we have to recognize that we've been doing things that are just the opposite, that are guaranteed to make us produce less food. And so, yeah, I'm optimistic, but we have to change directions in some sense and recognize that we can't, time after time after time, impose laws and regulations that cause us to produce less food.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's a great conversation. And it really goes to how we started off this conversation, Richard, and that is showing the role all of us have to play in this. Again, everyone, we've been speaking with Richard J. Sexton today. His new book is called Food Fight: Misguided Policies, Supply Challenges, and the Impending Struggle to Feed a Hungry World. You can get it here on Amazon, both in print as well as the Kindle edition. I'm going to highlight it again for you guys over there. Also, you can find out more information about Richard and the book by going to the publisher website at ucpress.edu. Again, that's ucpress.edu. Richard, thank you so much for the time. Really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Cyrus. Thank you so much for having me.
Glad to do it. And we thank your audience for tuning in to another great segment of Cyrus Webb Presents. Until next time, you'll make it a great one. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.